Hey, it's Kevin Gordon over at Korea Bochek. And I just want to spend a few minutes with you talking about decision-making processes during this really uncertain time as everybody's trying to figure out how and in what format they can return to school. And we keep getting questions from districts, run the gamut. And we represent districts that are rural, that are urban, that are small, that are large, that are K-12, that are elementary, that are high school. And there's not really a one size fits all solution for school districts. And we're getting a lot of questions about, can I do this? Do I have to do this? What's the best way to limit my liability? And we are having a hard time, coming up with solutions that are one size fits all because there just aren't any. And one of the situations coming up is, how do I make the best decision for my school district, for my students, for my staff, for my community, and limit my liability as much as possible? Now, the purpose of this conversation really isn't to talk about liability per se and tort immunity. That's another conversation that Rob Swain's going to have with you on another one of these chats. But I want to talk about decision making and how to put yourself in the best possible position while remaining true to your values as an educator and your community's needs. And I like to look at any decision that you're going to make, whether it's the big one, should we return to in-person learning or should we go to remote, or any number of smaller decisions that impact that overall decision, right? As encompassing several different areas that you need to consider. Now, the first area is legal. What are the legal implications? What are the legal requirements? What am I legally permitted to do? If I ignore something, what is my legal risk and liability? And as a lawyer, I'm in a pretty good position to help you navigate those questions. Now, that said, there are a lot of gray areas in this at this time. What's the extent of ISB guidance? How much do I have to follow it? Is it a commandment? Is it a suggestion? And those are kind of ever shifting. But as a lawyer, I can help you the most with the legal considerations. But that's just one of the considerations or the areas of consideration that you need to think about when you're making any decision. The next one's, what's the political ramification? And I like to talk about not so much in politics, but what's the community relations, community expectation regarding this decision that I need to make? How much buy-in will I get if I decide one way or the other? And how much is that buy-in necessary for the success of what I'm proposing? The next piece is the economic or the financial consideration. It doesn't do you any good to consider alternatives or initiatives or programs that you can't afford. But everything that you decide is going to have a financial impact. And how much of a financial impact can the district sustain? Is this a matter of we can reallocate some money, some budget priorities? Is this a matter of we're going to have to make some hard decisions about cutting and what are we going to cut? But that plays into your overall decision making. The next is educational. What are the educational implications of what is being decided? Is it better to come back in person or remote learning? Which students require or rely on in-person learning the most? What educational programs are we going to be able to successfully implement in an in-person learning environment? Are we going to have to cut some of our specials in order to accommodate in-person learning? Are we going to cut some of our special programs in classes if we have to go to remote? What are the social emotional implications of what we're proposing? Those are definitely in your wheelhouse as professional educators, and they are part of every single decision you're going to make. And then there's the operational and logistical considerations. How do we make this work? How do we operate, with a flow through the building? What's our capacity in any particular building or room? How are we going to get kids to school? Is it practical to get kids to school? And how does that drive our decision making on in-person or remote or any other thing that we're going to do? If we're going to offer extracurricular activities after school, How does that impact us from a transportation standpoint? Now, in every school district is going to have a different mix, but every decision that is made needs to look at one of these five or each of these five categories in making decisions. And I can't tell you which one is going to be the most important area for any decision that you have to make. There are going to be times when the legal considerations take a bit of a back seat because either the law is fairly gray or doesn't give you a clear path, and now you have to decide how much community buy-in do we have to make this successful? What are the educational implications? Can I afford this? Those may become more important for any particular decision that you have to make, and that's okay. What you're trying to do is make the best decision that you can for your school district, and the best decision that allows you, quite frankly, to sleep at night. What are you comfortable with? What can you pull off? What is the capacity within your district and amongst your staff to pull off? These are all parts of the decision-making process. And if you go through this process, it's possible that two different school districts come up with two completely different answers to the same question. And that's all right. And when you get to talking about what's our liability if we depart from ISB guidance in some form or fashion, or what happens if what we decide somebody gets COVID, or what happens if somebody doesn't like what we say and wants to sue us, well, that's where we get into the liabilities that and the tort immunities that you'll hear from discussion about from Rob Swain. And there's a lot of immunity for discretionary decision making, and I don't want to get too far ahead into what Rob's going to talk about, but part of discretionary immunity is determining policy, which just means making decisions. It doesn't mean board policy itself. It's anybody who's in a position to make the decision being made. In discretion, the exercise of discretion is the balancing of different considerations, in the balancing of interests, in the choosing between two or more options. That's discretion. And there is considerable immunity from liability for your discretionary decision making, even if it turns out to be not so great, or even if it is what we call in the law abused, right? So, God willing, you'll never have to confront that kind of a challenge to your decision making. But if you follow this process, it'll make your decision making a little bit more orderly. You'll ensure that you've covered as many bases as you can in making the decision. And you'll have helped yourself out in the case you are challenged on them. None of this is easy. I'm sure that when you all started out as professional educators, you never envisioned having to set up an educational program in the situation, in the circumstances that we're in right now. You never envisioned, although you've probably experienced to lesser degrees, a situation where no matter what decision you make, there's going to be a sizable portion of your community who doesn't agree with you. And that's a tough situation to be in. So really all you can do is the best that you can do. And if you follow through on an orderly process, you're going to get to that best decision for your school district as a whole. I wish you all the best of luck. And I know that despite all of the challenges, this school year is going to be a great success.